Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Higher Density Living. You're here with your hosts, not your favorite host, but your hosts, Alexander McKegg and Jason Rigby. And before, whoa,
yes, here
and
we go.
before we continue, I wanted to play the intro again, but I'm going to leave it because that's what we do. We're not even going to change that. I do want to give a shout out to Quality Mazda NM of New Mexico. If you were in the Colorado, Texas, or New Mexico area and you were looking to buy a very quality, very well put together car in a very educational process, you can reach out to qualitymazdanm.com, and they do deliver. So that is going to be our plug for today. And that leads us right into, Jason, lizard people.
Love this, lizard people. So you have, we're not talking David Icke lizard people.
No.
I want to make that clear. We are talking about the underground catacombs of Los Angeles. And there's a certain gentleman, and maybe you can kind of go into him a little bit. I don't know if you Wikipedia'd him or not.
Oh, yeah. The guy's name is Warren Shufelt. So first of all, if you don't know anything about Los Angeles is an interesting place. I don't particularly like the city in terms of a place to live for myself. But the entire city is actually a big oil field. There's oil derricks all over the place. So before it became heavily populated and commercial like you see it now, it was pretty much just like one giant refinery in Southern California.
Yeah, Ross, Ross, I think it was 1996, 98. A Ross superstore blew up. Part of it blew up because of the gases below.
Get out of here.
People were just, look this shit up.
Dude, are you serious?
Yeah, in LA. Type in Los Angeles.
I'm already looking it up. I'm already on it.
Ross dress for less.
Oh, yeah. How funny is that?
Just
yeah. You're just shopping. You're getting a discount. You're getting a discount on how long you're going to live. That's what I'll tell you.
Earthquakes, tsunamis. Come on, LA. What else you got?
Yeah. So it's interesting part about Los Angeles. So if you have all these pockets of oil that are hanging out naturally underneath the city, and considering the time when Warren Shufelt, this individual we're going to get into, created this machine, essentially a LiDAR machine to help him look through the ground, it would make sense that there may be some other caverns where the oil no longer sits, or other tunnels or things of the sort that could essentially house these lizard people, which Warren Shufelt was looking for. George Warren Shufelt. Now, this was in 1933, okay? So there's like, how do I put this? Everybody's trying to make a buck. Everyone's trying to make a name for themselves. Mm-hmm. It's the West Coast of the United States. It's not totally hopping yet. Maybe in San Francisco with a lot of the very French vibe over there. But in terms of the area, it's very industrial. So people are looking for a place to make a name for themselves. And at that time, you had, who knows, was this pre-George Adamski and everybody else? Do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
I mean, the only reason to go to California was oil or gold. There were still remnants of people. And I had read a little bit about him. Was he believed underneath this big fort, this old fort that was there, that there was mass amounts of gold. And then in our story today, we're going to see his whole, because back in those days, guys were all about trying to find gold.
I'm still about trying to find it. Listen, if I was outside in the Cerrillos Hills here in New Mexico and I found a nugget of gold, you know how happy I would be? I'd be absolutely elated. I might change my whole lifestyle. Stop podcasting. I get a mining pick, and I just do it all manually. So, all right. So there's this urban legend that actually occurred from the way this starts, from what we understand, in LA, that there were lizard people, an advanced race of humans who created an underground city 5,000 years prior to the founding of Los Angeles. Now, according to the story that's actually going on here, because of the gold rush and all this other stuff, there are apparently just immense amounts of riches in gold tablets, right, from the origins of this pre-human civilization, which anybody who's a treasure hunter, people that were already making that push, right, to try and find their name, claim their stake, no pun intended, over there in California, it just made sense. So before we even go any further, to even talk about George Warren Shufelt in 1933, this geophysicist, we have to understand where the origins of this myth actually comes from. So what's this idea of lizard people? Jason, did you do any history on this? Because I have some things here.
Yes, yeah, I do. Yeah, and one of the things that we have to make sure that we understand is there are evidence of carvings, statues. There's hieroglyphics in Egypt and in Peruvian. There are statues of lizard peoples. There's even one I saw where it showed like a lady, and then she had a lizard on her breast, like she was breastfeeding. So we must.
I'm sorry. You're saying someone was breastfeeding a lizard?
Yes, and she had a lizard head, but she had a female body, and then she was holding a little lizard and it had its tail wrapped around her, and she was breastfeeding it. So we have to take into consideration when we see these things, like, did they just come up with them? Did they come up with them from different cultures and tribes all across the world? Like, how do we have different places that people that have never met? See, this is the mystery. This is what I like about it. And then they're making lizard people. You know what I mean?
Well, think about it. All truth has to start somewhere, right? So even within the imagination, there has to be a point of fact where these things come from.
Mm-hmm.
So, like QAnon conspiracies, they douse a little bit of truth in there amongst all the nonsense.
Yes.
That's what keeps people hooked. That keeps them going, right? So let's consider this here. So, for instance, this is directly related to New Mexico. The Hopi lizard god was called Monongia Kachina, right? And we have these things called kachinas. It's a how would I put this? It's a cultural element. It's like these dolls which were resembling of these god figures or spirits to these Native American tribes.
Right.
But the Hopi Indians or Native Americans here in this area had actually, ingested is not the right word, adopted the Mayan culture, right? Where the Mayans brought a lot of this reptilian, I don't want to say energy, but reptilian ideology, artifacts, art, thing of the sorts that would come up. So when there would be these cultural gatherings where people would make a pilgrimage up to like the Black Mesa here in Albuquerque, right, to watch the sunsets across the Sandias and then do the petroglyph drawings in those sacred areas, a lot of that history was brought with it, especially from the Mesoamerica region up to where we find the Southwest in the United States, like Arizona and New Mexico in particular. So this Monongia Kachina was this Hopi lizard god. And you'll see it as you go around New Mexico. There's massive like lizards. People will put them on their buildings, or you can go into like gift shops and you can buy these, special lizard kachinas. And the idea here was that George Warren Shufelt in 1933 met a Hopi Indian chief called Chief Greenleaf. Okay. And Chief Greenleaf had spoken to this gentleman, George Warren Shufelt, about this idea that there was an advanced civilization that actually resided underneath the area of Los Angeles, right? So these reptilioid humanoid beings, these life forms, were living underneath this area and had soon left it, right? So after 5,000 years, they weren't still there, but had left all their gold and all their treasures behind. And this is...
I want people to understand this. Whether you believe in lizard people down in L.A., there is a whole idea, and we don't have to get into this because I think we've done an episode on it, but I mean, Hitler, a lot of people believed that there were underground Antarctica. We have here in the United States, we have elite people believing in this, that, there are certain groups of people that are of a higher, he believed it was like a higher race and more pure. That was his racist beliefs, but that they were underground. And we've talked about the blue people and different things like that. So this isn't as far-fetched as people think.
No, like if you're talking about the kingdom of Agartha and blue people, there's large historical record in the Hindu Kush of these blue-skinned individuals living within the mountains and underneath it in large pockets of the earth. There have been geospatial and, ground-penetrating radar analysis of the earth, and there are very large mile-high caverns that sit inside the earth's crust. This was also corroborated by Billy Edward Albert Meyer in his contact reports with the Plejaren, and this was also talked about in the Law of One material. A lot of people can take these things and spin them off and do all these other things like, people are in Mount Shasta, they're doing this, right? And they got the lizard people under LA. there are places where these pockets exist.
Mm-hmm.
They naturally occur. If you're here in New Mexico, you can walk in these massive lava tubes that are underneath the ground. They're completely hollow, but they're these huge caverns inside the Earth's crust, and you have the ability to walk through it. So the aspect of having larger caverns, especially one with some sort of base atmosphere that sits inside of them, doesn't seem like something unreasonable. And interesting fact, and I'll share this with you, humans don't have the ability to absorb vitamin D, right, without direct contact with the sun's rays itself.
Right.
But what science has actually found over time is that plants themselves have the ability to grow deep underground where there's any void of light whatsoever, because the penetrating photons that actually make it through the crust are still being absorbed by the plants at a very base level, at a much lower frequency, and it allows those plants to grow in areas where there's absolutely no light whatsoever. So if you think about someone that's advanced or having atmospheres or oxygen or things in these pockets of the Earth, people living underneath it, it does have some feasibility that there could have been a group that chose to live underground. And by the way, what safer place to be when you have a completely contained, stable environment for you to have your growth? And if you have a way to get up to the top, even better. Am I off base here?
No, and we don't realize the percentage of the ocean that we have not discovered yet. We have Earth masses here that are miles and miles and miles long that nobody has ever been into. So I don't want people to think that because, you live in a city and you've never gone out into these real rural areas. I mean, not only is there tribes that have never seen humans, that's still happening, but there are places that no humans have ever been to. So, and this is underground. We're talking about the stuff that's just we walk around in and that we swim in and that we can take boats and, go across the sea and deliver, supplies back and forth across countries. So think about this. We haven't even explored what we can easily get to.
No, our technology still lacks with exploration. I mean, 120 years ago, people were still taking wooden ships up to the Arctic, trying to crack through the ice. Like, it's a joke. It's an absolute joke, right? If you think about it, there's so much that is still lacking to be explored. We're constantly trying to explore space, but we lack so much understanding of our own planet, right?
Yes,
and even how to take care of it, So people at a time when, if I can't go up in space, I can tell you where I can go. I can go underground. So George Warren Shufelt, 1933, after speaking with Chief Greenleaf of a Hopi tribe, right, who shared with him this Hopi myth legend about the Mauna Kea, which was the Hopi lizard god who was essentially running the show for all these lizard humanoid individuals, told him that there was an area of several such communities along the Pacific coast, in the Deer Basin is what it's called, where these lizard communities actually lived underground. I don't know how much space there is. I've never measured underneath it. So George Warren Shufelt, he's a geophysicist, goes about his way to go figure out how he's going to look underground. So he creates this radio X-ray machine. So here's the idea. X-rays at the time were hip. Remember the thing where everyone's drinking milk and you can watch it go down? They didn't realize they're just blasting themselves with radiation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that stuff. I absolutely love it. Just playing around with science. Oh, radon, no big deal. So what he was doing is he was actually sending out radio waves that would come back and then plate themselves against a negative, right? Which essentially give him the X-ray for what sort of imagery would be underneath the ground. So he's just sending waves down that would essentially bounce back. And depending on the differential of these waves would tell him whether or not there was an open area that actually resided, right? So it's going to be the length of time that it takes for that wave to actually bounce back. Now, there was also, at the same time when he had heard this myth, that an ancient sheepskin map, which was held by two treasure hunters, I love this shit, two treasure hunters on the West Coast, like these kind of gold seekers, helped this whole idea about the lizard people actually go viral. So this map on sheepskin was some sort of corroboration with what Chief Greenleaf, right, and the Hopi Indian myth talked about with these lizard people and the lizard clan, that they actually resided in this area of Los Angeles. So for a brief amount of time, right, the LA Times had actually picked up on the story of what Shufelt was actually doing. So he's going out there and he's looking for these lost catacombs and their inhabitants all across America, right? So now that LA, the news, the major news picked it up, everybody's like, I got to look underground. I got to go find these caverns. It reminds me a lot of the time in the Victorian era over in the British Isles when they were searching for the graves of giants. And they found quite a few of them. Like, I'm going out with my wife and we're all dressed up and we got our parasols and shit, but I got a shovel and I want to go dig up some 14-foot being. You know what I mean? Who's got like a big shield and like a massive bow. You know, it's like, it's that sort of vibe.
Yeah. And when you look at it's so interesting because when you look not just at the culture and the time, but you look at, and this is what I think is cool back then. I was talking to somebody about this earlier, is I was reading about this gentleman on Wikipedia. It wasn't a famous guy. He'd written like 3 books. Yeah. And they just mentioned his dad roughly. And his dad was a philosopher, a scientist, you know, this and that. And then it said his main job, he was a carpenter. But that's how people were back then.
Yeah. No.
You know, I mean, you look at Benjamin Franklin, you know, I mean, you look at, you know, all our founding forefathers here in the United States. Mm-hmm. And even, you know, UK and everywhere, you can go just about anywhere in a society, especially back then. People were studied, they were learned, they were interested in these things. They went on adventures like this. This was fun for the family.
Jason, don't you feel like there was more curiosity back then? I feel like people have lost curiosity. I feel like people think that everything that's been discovered has been discovered, and there's no reason for them to go out and like search for stuff.
How much explorations are we doing now? Hardly any.
Oh, so hardly any. And I'm telling you, we're right now in the 4th largest state in the United States. It's one of the least populated. There's so much to explore. I've walked around in areas where I saw a petroglyph, which belongs in a national park, is just residing out in the middle of nowhere. Has anyone explored this area? You know what I mean? It's untouched lands. You got the Amazon.
We look at Elon Musk. We look at Elon Musk for going up in space, and we kind of see him as an explorer. He's kind of like the eccentric billionaire / but I mean, you know, they just found that, and you've probably heard of this. They just found that in, I think it was the Antarctic, that boat that was in pristine condition.
Get out of here!
Underwater.
No way.
Yeah, it was one of the guys back in the day. Just type in found boat. It was one of the explorers. And they found
107 years after it sank.
Yeah,
it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful.
But those were the things that were happening back then. People were like taking, like you said, wood ships and taking them up into the chunks of ice, and then taking ice picks. I mean, look at it. I mean, we stayed in line to go to Mount Everest. These motherfuckers were.
Yeah, it's Ernest Shackleton's ship, the Endurance. Did you ever see the original Ernest Shackleton job description?
No.
We'll have to talk about it on another show because it's superb, and I think it talks a lot about human character. But you're correct, though. Listen, that guy's ship is pristine. That was only 107 years ago. He had a wooden boat down in the Antarctic, right? Off of Point Nemo. Like, get out of here. So it's not off base that somebody would be looking for lizard people. And by the way, if you look at the map, it's in the shape of a lizard head. So here's what's interesting. And I will share this. You go down to South America, and you know, like the big, like, not Incan drawings, but what are those big things they have on the side of the hill you can see from space? You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why it's escaping me.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. And I'm pretty sure most of our audience does too.
Yeah.
We have an intelligent, if you're listening to Higher Density Living, you are at that higher density. So they will get it.
They'll get it. So if you're down there and you think about these cultures, if something is so incredibly important, would you not form your city after the importance of that thing? Say, for instance, the pyramids, they lined them up with Orion, right? Yes. Or, you know, if you go down to the Mayan culture and the way that they took, you know, celestial spheres and aligned them with how they built their square stack pyramids, right? It doesn't seem off base that someone would say that the entire underground city of these lizard people is in the shape of a lizard head. Would it?
No. I even think the gold tablets, it would be easy to write on gold.
Well, Jason, you and I both know that the Vatican and Harvard University Library both have books that are printed on lead pages, gold pages, silver pages, and other metals bound with human skin and other animal skin because they understood the value of preserving these things for a long time. Why wouldn't you just press it into gold? Gold's soft enough. You just tap it right in.
even if they didn't view gold as valuable, I don't know if they exchanged it or not, or if it was a form of money in the Mayan culture. But I do know it would be easy to write on, to draw on. So I mean,
you just press right into it. If it's 24 karat, it's soft. You could press whatever you want.
And this whole idea of, because there was the story. The story was the Mayans came up from there was a meteor shower, a catastrophic meteor shower that hit. So they had to come up. They come up through, the West Coast, and then populated and stuff like that. So I don't think we, and you look at Mexico and stuff like that, and you can see. I mean, they have people that are Mayan descendants, and you could see it even today in their face.
Correct.
Like what you see, what Mayan people look like back then. You
certain mestizo faces, certain mestizo people's faces actually carry that same genetic structure that the Mayans were actually bringing. But listen, this is wild, because what is it about a lizard? A lizard's not a mammal, is it? No, it's a reptile. What do reptiles do? They lay eggs, right? So the figure of creation, the Orpheus egg, which were talked about even by the Greeks, has to be laid by something, whether it be a bird or a reptile, to speak about that sort of incubation.
Yes.
Does it not?
Yes.
So I think it's interesting that the Mayans took to this idea of a figure of creation coming from this lizard god, right? The Monagia Kachina. And with this, you have this egg, this creational egg that comes from this lizard. There's something about the brood. There's something about the incubation. What was it? The film Prometheus?
Yes,
eggs.
Yes, great. Yes,
they had eggs.
Yes.
It wasn't anything else. These things were like growing out of eggs. There's this idea of incubation. 2001: Space Odyssey. Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah.
Do you remember the cosmic egg at the very end, and the baby's kind of hanging in the egg, and it's like looking over the Earth?
I think we did an episode a while back on the cosmic egg.
We might have done an episode on the cosmic egg.
I think we did. We've done so many, I forget, but I'm almost positive.
Fuck the Easter egg. Let's get the cosmic egg.
Yeah, exactly.
Cosmic egg hunting.
And the thing that gets me on this is in the article, they've talked about multiple articles, even the LA Times, that they made the tunnels with a mysterious chemical.
Yeah. What is this chemical?
That's the thing. I want to know. It's like, how do you make tunnels? I mean, we know, and we've done episodes here in New Mexico. You can see them. I was just talking to a guy the other day that is a tunnel explorer here in New Mexico, and he finds these tunnels that were dug by these nuclear machines. You can go into them, like a Truth and Consequences has them.
Big circles, right? And they cut through it. And at the same time, it's fusing the rock. It gets super hot, so you get this beautiful glass-like tunnel that actually gets cut. Because what do? You're going to pull all the waste out after you've cut it? You can't do that. You actually have to get it hot enough and like melt it into another thing, right? So,
yeah, they have like a high-speed train that go to the different labs and stuff like that here. And that's pretty much this gentleman was talking. That's what he does. He explores all that stuff, and he's been in these caves. And a lot of them are abandoned. He was in one that was like a bunker, and there was ammunition and stuff like that. It was really interesting. He had pictures, but it's not far-fetched. I mean, Elon Musk is talking about digging tunnels.
Yeah, he's just 100 years behind the game.
Yeah, doesn't he call him the Boring Company? Isn't that the tunnel company?
Yeah, get it. It's boring. Get it? Yeah. It's a hole, but it's also boring at the same time. What do you do?
And that's interesting because he wants to dig tunnels in L.A.
Yeah, is he looking for the golden tablets?
That would be interesting. Elon, come on the show.
What's the data here? What was the claim that Shufelt actually said? He said that he had discovered with his X-ray machine, and there's a picture here, and we'll post the picture in the. I wish I could share the screen on the video podcast for everybody, but we'll post the picture to show of him sitting with his X-ray machine in L.A. It's a copper-looking little thing on 3 legs. But he said that he found 1,900 square feet of tunnels, rooms with 9,000 feet of floor space, and 16 places where gold was stored, all by using his radio X-ray machine. First of all, I don't know how he's going to know if it's gold with the radio X-ray machine. I don't really understand the science of it. I don't know if he ever submitted a patent. I probably should have looked into it. But he created this map below the surface of Fort Moore, which was the old military fort in the Los Angeles area. But here's the problem. When they went to start digging, the radio x-ray machine said it was 1,000 feet down. Well, Shufelt didn't have the equipment to do any of this stuff. And every time he would dig beyond 250 feet, it would just fill in with water. So he had no ability to actually get down to the thing that he said his machine actually stated existed right within these tunnels. So the map, which is shown, which he apparently corroborated with on the sheepskin map from the treasure hunters, was never actually visually seen with anyone's eyes underground because they couldn't dig 5 times the depth or 4 times the depth they actually had achieved when they were going down in under Los Angeles. So
yeah, and all of this is in the old newspaper articles. Los Angeles Library has the map. There has been stories that somebody found because they had outlets to these tunnels to create fresh air from the coast. Mm-hmm. And there was supposed to be, from what was, I watched a YouTube video on this. There's a lot of things on this, which is really cool. But there was supposedly somebody went to the tunnels where the inlet is over by the ocean and then came through, because LA is not that far from the ocean, and then came through, and supposedly they had found some gold tablets and then the city has them. But, I mean, if that's true, you think that would have leaked and people would have known, and, how would you keep that not going viral,
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to. Yeah,
only the Vatican.
Only the Vatican could do that. Only they can keep that under wraps. And if I look at just so I give people context here, and I'll describe it to the listeners that are just here on audio. This device is sitting on 3 legs, like paint easel legs that were wood, with a radio X-ray box and then a tube, which essentially insulates and sends directionally those X-rays down into the ground. And Shufelt will just sit there in a little chair and then press the button to essentially capture the X-rays, and then he would go back and then look at those negatives to see what actually occurred underneath the surface. And you can look this up. UCLA, their Library of Digital Collections, actually shows a picture of the mining engineer George Warren Shufelt with his radio X-ray device for underground observations in 1934. And even UCLA said they were looking underneath Fort Moore for these legendary creatures, these creatures of lore with lots of gold, and that was the massive draw. But here's what I will add, which is super cool. There was a list on in Billy Meyer's materials of humanoids that actually exist. They call them Vessens throughout the vastness of the universe that the Plejaren Federation have actually identified. Number 1, humanoids, people that look just like you and me. Number 2 is actually the amphiboids, right? So like frog-like human beings, right? They have aquatic animal nature. They can live in both water and land, but they're a hybrid human, right? Heavily waterlogged. But the third one is the reptiloids. And they state that they are human life forms of mixed hybrid human and reptilian form. Their bodies strongly covered with a scaling of reptilian lizard-like consistency. And they do state here, and the Plejarans say this specifically, there is no truth to the reptilian conspiracy theory peddled by David Icke. So the fact that these reptilians run the United States or these world governments, they say that doesn't
they
even
can unzip out of
Hillary
Clinton can unzip.
You know what I mean?
Hillary Clinton's far worse than a reptilian.
What was that? What was that?
Most video? Politicians are, all of them.
They're all terrible. What was the? Was it Justin Bieber, the one that video that went viral one day when he had like a lizard tongue or something?
Yeah,
in his live show.
Yeah, it's like, so these conspiracy theories, like you said, a little bit of truth, and then it is interesting though if you look up like the little idols that they had, the reptilian human drawings and carvings, and so obviously these the Plejarians we're talking about, they at some point must have, whether it was during Egyptian time, because we have frog people in the Egyptian hieroglyphics, whether these because even Ross stated that they made a mistake when they came down during that time. So maybe you had a mix of I'm just speculating, but maybe all of these were coming down here at that time, and so the Egyptian people were just mixed with these extraterrestrial beings. But I mean, I always tell people, you have to remember, we are extraterrestrial.
That's what people forget.
The
Just
DNA
because they look
that
like
we have
humans.
is extraterrestrial.
Yeah, correct. Do you want me to? You're going to check. You ready for this? This is great. They have the list of all the different humanoids, like the 14 of them.
Mm-hmm.
They have these ones that are like super interesting. They're called, aeroids, AE with a double dot, RIOIDS, right? And they're in term like a humanoid life form with a human sort of body, but they breathe poisonous gases, and their climate that they live in is actually a toxic gas atmosphere.
That would
Could
be
you
perfect.
imagine?
There's a lot of planets like that.
They don't have bad breath. They have breath that kills you.
Yes. And I want people to know the next episode, we're going to get into the 14 races.
Yes, and I want to get into those 14 races. So I want to thank you, everybody, for listening. And by the way, I want to thank our final sponsor, Tartle. It's the only data marketplace in the world where you can share any and all data which you create on the internet. And through that sharing, you can get paid for doing so. And it's 100% free to sign up. Thank you, everybody.